Welcome to Ask Dr. Change. I'm Dr. Linda Ackerman Anderson. I'm happy to have you join me today to explore how to seriously uplevel your leadership and consulting to transformational changes, all through conscious change leadership. Welcome. Today's episode is about leading change as a strategic discipline. What do we mean by that? The question I'm answering today is about how to make change a more established practice in the organization rather than a sideline but helpful service so that it's really a strategic discipline. Let me ask you a few questions today, and then I'm going to ask you to do some serious consideration of the options I'm going to propose. So my questions for you: what is the state of change in your organization? Where does change management sit? Project management. Do you have a PMO? What level of control does it have over all the changes happening? Does your organization support and use Agile, Lean Six Sigma, OD, other approaches to change? There are so many changes in organizations today, which inevitably produce a wide range of success as well as some poor results, as the case may be. And so what we're after here is how to not make it a rigid practice, but actually a discipline that is common and shared and skilled across the organization. So the question is, if you can generate a way to get leadership's attention to up-level how the organization addresses change, how it supports especially transformational initiatives, you'll drastically improve the track record of change in the organization. Now, how to get leadership's attention? Major strategy here is if you could potentially do an organization-wide scan of the organization's change practices and track record, what models it uses, what tools it uses, what language it uses, what works, what doesn't work, but is repeated over and over again, because that's the way it's been. If you can make the change for addressing major change initiatives in a common way, in a practiced way, in a best practice way, you can dramatically reduce financial, human, and time cost of making changes, especially transformational changes. In all, this is a major paradigm shift from project management and change management to making change a strategic priority. So what I'm proposing is not a distinct aspect of how organizations are designed and structured today, but it adds change. So strategic disciplines. Finance is a strategic discipline. IT, human resources, supply chain, marketing, they're all strategic disciplines with common practices and approaches in the organization. The same is needed for change. We are abound with changes, especially transformational changes. So why not up-level the practice of change in the organization at the enterprise level? So I want to ask you to just imagine, what if you were called on to build deeper organizational change capability for all change efforts? What if you were at the table with sponsors planning all major change efforts from the very beginning? What if you were expected to influence leaders on initiative scope, pace, resourcing, capability, leadership style of various initiatives, especially those with strong cultural components, culture itself, leadership mindset about those changes? What if you were actually accountable for establishing infrastructures that orchestrate all major changes in a common way, adapted to special needs, but a common backbone? What if you were accountable for partnering with all of the change resources in the organization? Project management, change management, lean, agile, training and development, OD, whatever else exists there, so that in partnership, you're able to use them on change efforts at the appropriate time for the best outcome for those projects. A while back, and I'll tell a couple stories about how this thinking came to be, but I want to cover 5 potential strategies to make change a strategic discipline in your organization. The 5 are an enterprise change agenda, a common change process methodology, change infrastructures and best practices, a strategic change center of excellence, and a strategic change office. If any one of these can be helpful to your organization, it will make a drastic difference. And of course, and more of them, the better for the organization. So I'm going to talk about each one, how it really came to be, what it's about, and what its benefit is. And as I go through each one, I would ask you to think about the possibility, the potential, your positioning to be able to introduce this notion, what data you might gather to make the case for any particular one of the disciplines, and how you might proceed. So I want you to imagine each one as if it could happen in your organization. The first one I want to talk about is the enterprise change agenda. I have 2 stories to make the case for this and how it came to be. I was asked to come into a provincial healthcare system across 10 hospitals, many individual local units, critical care units. They had identified 200 initiatives within the whole system and realized, rightly so, as executives, that it was too many. They couldn't possibly deal with that. So they cut it to 58, which was still too many. That's when I got the call to come in and help them figure out, how do we handle all this? We've already cut it down significantly. How do we go about this? Well, the first thing I recognized was that their idea of what it took to lead an initiative within the healthcare system was sorely limited in terms of delivering results. So the first thing I did was to teach change leadership, the process of change, the infrastructures of change, and how they were considering announcement to be rollout, which it wasn't. And so significant upleveling of their understanding. Then we went ahead and made 8 buckets of initiatives so that they were dealing with 8 major ways of operating differently rather than 58. And so we changed the pace. And most importantly, we realized they needed a way to structure how they onboarded new initiatives, ways that they could produce proposals for a new initiative. They could say yes, they could say no. They could figure out how it all fit together. They actually created infrastructure for how to manage how change initiatives were brought into what we began calling their change agenda, or not allowed, or readjusting the agenda. We enabled them to evaluate what they had on the agenda for new resources, for resources required, capacity, pacing. It was a major effort altering how they address change across the organization. The second example that I have is with an electric utility that was complaining they had no way to prioritize. They had way too many things going on, not enough resources, a lot of chaos, people going after each other, competing with each other. It was just too much happening without any controls at all. There are competition and conflicts and politics at play. So they realized they had no mechanism for gatekeeping what initiatives to take on. So similarly, as I'm about to share with you, we instituted ways for them to acknowledge they wanted to take on an initiative or not, how many initiatives they could handle, their resources. It gave them an opportunity to step back to say, what can we succeed at? What do we have capacity for? What's the right pacing? Given, this is important, given everything else going on in the organization. We can only take on just so many changes because we have an operation here. So The enterprise change agenda got born and has been executed and tailored in a variety of settings. The enterprise change agenda ensures 5 critical success requirements. Think about each one of these, given the changes that your current organizations or client organizations have undergoing right now. If they were able to deliver these success requirements, would they sign on for creating an enterprise change agenda process? First critical success requirement: knowledge, clarity that the current change efforts are the right ones to execute and fulfill business strategy. Secondly, their efforts are prioritized, organized, assigned, and optimally paced for the organization to continue to operate effectively and take on these changes. Third requirement: the organization has the capacity and the stamina and the capability and in-house change resources to succeed. Fourth, the ability to assess and drive required culture change in every major initiative. This became a major focus of attention because so many initiatives were devoid of any attention to culture or the human dynamics. So the enterprise change agenda enabled an oversight of culture change across the initiatives, let alone across the organization. And fifth, the best coordination and leverage of your external consultants. Now, this was a critical one and a little bit politically fraught because the larger organizations, there are lots of different, 3, 4, 5 different external consultants all in, thinking they were bringing in the best change management approach or project management, their own content expertise. And so how could they all be organized and orchestrated for the best bang for the buck? The enterprise change agenda process enables this, alters the way external consultants would be brought in and managed to optimize value for the organization. Now, the enterprise change agenda is not just a thing, it's not just a deliverable, it's a process. Inside the organization, it follows strategic business planning. What does the organization need to accomplish in this year or the next 3 to 5 years? It precedes operational planning because when you look at the change efforts required by business planning, and then you want to make sure that they can be set up for success, that has an impact on what can be done effectively with resources in operational planning. So the enterprise change agenda execution happens before operational planning. And it's revisited throughout the year because new initiatives show up, some are completed, they get taken off the agenda. So it's a process, it's an ongoing process. It can be set up for each autonomous business unit that HR has its own change agenda, supply chain has its own change agenda, production, manufacturing, engineering, whatever the functions are, marketing and sales inside the organization can have their own change agenda, all folding up into what the whole organization needs and can successfully sustain. And typically it has one executive in charge of its process and its value to make sure that it's happening, that people are participating, they understand the process, they understand the protocols of getting on the change agenda, and they know what to expect as to whether or not their initiative will fit in this year's agenda. So I do want to say that the enterprise change agenda is, if I were to pick one, it's hard for me to pick one, but if I were, I would say the enterprise change agenda has had the most powerful impact on my client organizations when the executives realized they could get their arms around and get perspective about the changes being asked of the organization and how best to lead them. The second initiative that I want to talk about, the second discipline, is a common change process methodology. So I'd ask you, how many models are in use in the organization? Does any one function or person oversee their use when they're called on, when they're needed? Do they support one another or do they compete? Do they use the same tools and language? Likely not. We don't see that very much. And so, project management has great tools. Change management has great tools. Agile has its own way of doing things. How do they align? How do they integrate on behalf of what's best for the overall enterprise? So for us, we recommend one common change process methodology, the Change Leaders Roadmap. First, it's a process methodology, not a framework. The distinction there is that since change is a process, it's not an event, it requires a sequence of actions, guidance that takes us from where we are today to where we need to go in order to achieve success. A framework lays out, names a variety of really essential, necessary, but disparate pieces of work that need to be done. We need communications. We need structure. We need, some engagement. We need design of the desired state. But in what order and how do they all roll out together into an overarching change strategy and plan? The Change Leaders Roadmap accomplishes that. For those of you wanting more information about the Change Leaders Roadmap, I would encourage you to go to episode 7 of Ask Dr. Change of this podcast. It's called Guiding Project Launch to Full Adoption, the Change Leaders Roadmap. And of course, the book, The Change Leaders Roadmap, is available as well. They give you a great overview of the CLR, the 9 phases, the activities, and the tasks within it. All other change models basically fit within the Change Leaders Roadmap. However, it expands the work, starting at the very beginning of an initiative all the way through sustained business benefits. That's unique to the Change Leaders Roadmap. So when you have other things going on in the organization, one of the biggest confronts of using the CLR is to project management, because that's so typically the common practice used. But project management doesn't start at the very beginning and doesn't end at the very end of sustained business benefits. So how can you encompass the value of project management and change management and OD as you're orchestrating an entire process of change? It also supports common language and common tools. So having a common process methodology is essential. Now, clearly, you would have to do a scan of how many models do we have going on, how many approaches, what level of collaboration or integration do we have, or are we being damaged by a lack of integration across all the methodologies? And so one common methodology, strategic discipline. Next up is creating change infrastructures and best practices that work. Now, this is a direct offshoot of common methodology, because out of our methodology, can we create common ways of doing things so we don't have 6 different business cases or 6 different approaches to design? We have common practices. I want to give you, just name off a whole variety of potential infrastructures and best practices to consider establishing. Standard practices for case for change and change strategy. Case for change is different than your business case. Business case is the numbers. Case for change is the reason why and what's in it for us to achieve this. Perhaps infrastructures around governance, roles, team charters, how decisions are to be made. Perhaps recommended conditions for success and metrics for orchestrating major changes. Conditions for success are, again, another episode just on this, ways, vehicles that we set changes up for success from the very beginning, done consciously. How about templates for change communications and stakeholder engagement, so that we aren't doing it always the same way, but we are making sure we're covering the bases of what's needed for communications and engagement? And then infrastructure for mechanisms to ensure adequate capacity. This is one of the critical issues, that let's do more and do more and do more and do more until there's no more space in the sponge. And so how do we actually evaluate capacity and ensure that we have what's needed for our changes? Perhaps mechanisms for rapid and strategic course correction. Now, most projects will have an issue resolution system. This is at a strategic level. How do we actually create a strategy, a process, and a structure for strategic course correction? How about vehicles for multiple project integration? We call this air traffic control. We have so many initiatives. In the one healthcare system story I talked about, they had 58 initiatives going through phase one launch of their work all in the same year. It was crazy. There's no way they could have done all of that work. And so multiple project integration helps alter the pace and capacity and piggybacking work so that there's actually less work being asked of the organization, but more being accomplished. Air traffic control, very powerful. How about change leadership competencies? So as in that healthcare system, also the electric utility was training the change leaders, the executives, in good conscious change leadership practices with the skills, the knowledge, the behaviors, and the mindsets required to lead their changes effectively. They're all change leaders, and so how to have them understand what that means. How about an inventory and accessibility of best practices and tools so that we have tried it, it works, we've tailored it, it's now in our inventory, it's in our repertoire of how we do this particular thing because we have that tool tried and true. And then lastly, how about electronic information and knowledge management tools so that we know how to capture the decisions, the information, the questions, the progress being made on projects in a standardized way. So we know how to input it and how to get it when we need it. All of these are examples of change infrastructures and best practices. Do you need all of them? Not necessarily. Pick and choose what would have the highest leverage, where's the need in the organization, and then be able to craft doing things in a more, I will say, standardized way, but not rigid, because all changes may have their unique requirements, but at least you have a backbone of commonality. Now, I want to talk about the Strategic Change Center of Excellence. Many organizations have centers of excellence in a variety of their functions. In terms of strategic change, this is the organization's vehicle for ensuring alignment on how major changes are being led, so that we do have a common launch, we do have a common strategy, we do have a common way of orchestrating planning and design, deployment, implementation, and adoption. How about the Center of Excellence also looking after mastering change strategy consulting experience so that everybody who is applied using their services on major changes has a common level of mastery, so they're working consistently and collaboratively together. The Center of Excellence can steward your methodology and best practices, be the holding place for your inventory of best practice tools. It can have access to all change resources and in particular be able to call on them at the right time for the right priority initiatives. So it's really an orchestrator of the change resources in the organization to make sure that they're used in the best possible way. The Center of Excellence can support mission-critical change efforts. So perhaps there are consultants within it, or they tap consultants in the organization for the most mission-critical projects. So your best resources are applied to the most priority, highest priority initiatives. It's also your place for continuous professional development. We never reach the end of the road on how to do things. And so we're always developing and always fine-tuning and always figuring out how to do things differently. So continuous professional development done as a collaboration of your change consultants and change resources across the organization. In many organizations, I ask, do you have a vehicle for identifying and working with, networking with all the change resources across the organization? Many organizations are dispersed globally. So do your change resources ever get together for development, for talking about what's working, what's not, for best practices? The Center of Excellence would be basically your kingpin for orchestrating that work to ensure development and consistency across the organization. The Strategic Change Center of Excellence can also support the creation of your enterprise change agenda. It can consult on major changes, ideally from day one, so that it can set them up for success. It doesn't own them. It doesn't control them. It services them. It can ensure multiple project integration and project acceleration strategies are at play. It can certainly advocate for conditions for success, not just at launch, but all the way through the effort. And if need be, raise issues of pace, capacity, and resource requirements. And it can steward culture change, leadership coaching and development, and the full organizational alignment to the major change efforts that cut across the enterprise and need everyone to be aligned with how they need to operate. So there are many functions that the Strategic Change Center of Excellence can serve. Any one of these things will make a difference in how the organization orchestrates its changes. It's a very powerful strategy to be able to coalesce, align, and influence how change takes place across the organization. Lastly, I want to talk about the Strategic Change Office and contrast it with the typical PMO. It's similar, but it goes beyond what a PMO does. A Strategic Change Office is an executive level function. It's a senior function charged with ensuring the success of the organization's enterprise change agenda. Again, it runs it leads it on behalf of the executives. It leads the enterprise change agenda process for the executives so that it can surface when capacity is being reached, when resources are scarce, when there are issues that the executives need to look at and address, air traffic control, when too much is going on or chaos or things are not going as planned. It can surface all of that for the executives. And it isn't one of those 15-minute agenda items on the executive team. It can actually establish working sessions when things need to be adjusted. The Strategic Change Office occupants work with executive sponsors to help shape and resource initiatives to be set up to be successful. So projects can't be kicked off with, directly to scope, schedule, budget. There is a lot that takes place before that request. And so the Strategic Change Office can ensure those early launch decisions, full stream, upstream work is actually accomplished. It can also, like the Center of Excellence, build the organization's change capability and mobilize all of the internal resources that are needed on priority projects. It can house the Strategic Change Center of Excellence, so there isn't redundancy there. There's commonality, and so it oversees the use of infrastructures and best practices, and so the two can go hand in hand. It can ensure the best use of external consultants, so you're getting the biggest bang for the buck. And it can raise capacity, pacing, and interface issues as they arise. So, senior executive function that helps to launch and oversee the enterprise change agenda process to ensure the organization is focusing on the highest priority change efforts, setting them up for success, and overseeing them all the way through sustained business benefits. Again, it doesn't do all the work. It ensures conditions for success and orchestrates best practices. So, I've covered a lot of ground. Enterprise change agenda, common change process methodology, change infrastructures and best practices, Strategic Change Center of Excellence, and Strategic Change Office. One thing I will note in the Strategic Change Office, there is frequently a Chief Change Officer. Since it's a C-suite position, a Chief Change Officer is another thing to consider. For those of you wanting more information about this, I have a white paper that I can send you if you let me know, but it's also Chapter 5 of our book, Beyond Change Management. And so much more information is available there. It's Chapter 5 of Beyond Change Management. You can find out more information. Any one of these can make a huge difference. You don't have to take them all on. Perhaps it's an emergent process. Any one of them can make a huge difference. And again, people ask me, which one is the highest leverage? It depends upon what your organization needs. I always am listening for enterprise change agenda, common methodology, and that leads a lot to many of the others. So my pro tip for you today: consider a radical shift in your role and services from change management and project management to supporting projects at the enterprise level. So going from what piece of service you offer to looking at offering an entire process from beginning to end, but doing so at the enterprise level. To do any of these strategic change disciplines at the enterprise level, it means being positioned to establish any of them for the enterprise. So that means finding a way to make the case for the paradigm shift of any one of these items. How can you generate the data? How can you get leadership's attention so that you can actually make the case for such a solution inside the organization? Building change leadership capability across the enterprise is a huge effort and a transformation, a paradigm shift for most organizations today that are buried in major changes that are running in complex ways. So consider how you can be positioned. That too reflects the personal reflection for you today. Can you see yourself establishing and doing this level of work for your life and for the organization that you serve? Do you have the positioning in the organization? Do you have the image and branding to be able to be seen in this way that you can support this level of work, to be called on to do this level of work in the organization? It's very different than just project support. This really is up-leveling, looking at the entire enterprise, which would require you to see the entire system and how everyone is orchestrating change, how all the initiatives are being led. So do you see the whole system and how it performs change today? How can you up-level your seeing, your confidence to be able to do this, your services to move in this direction? Some serious reflection here as you go through and listen to and imagine the possibility, not just for your ability to support this work, but also to support the organization to do this level of work on behalf of its transformation and sustainability. I hope you found some value in today's conversation. Do let me know if you have further questions about this. We can do special episodes on any of the initiatives, any of the disciplines. And so I hope you have found some value today. Thanks for spending time with me. Today's subject is one of the key topics that we feature in our Leading Transformational Change online program. If you'd like to learn more about leading transformational change, go to beingfirst.com/LTC. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope you gained some valuable insights for your work. Please send me your questions and challenges by going to askdrchange.com.